What I start by doing is taking my illustration and marking the edges all around so we get a sharp edge when we finish with our picture. And here I'm using the painter's tape that comes with the kit. Now I'm wetting my canvas by spraying a bit all around, and what we're about to do now is a gradient effect. I've mixed my colors with a lot of white, so I have a light pink and a light blue. I start at the top by going down with the blue. Of course, I'm using a clean brush, and I go down to just below halfway with the blue color and make sure it covers well. I have the most paint at the top, and then it starts to get a bit lighter as I go down. Now I take the light pink color. I make sure, of course, that I have a completely clean brush before I start. And then I begin, just like I did with the light blue, to gently blend the light pink color up towards the light blue. And I keep blending, trying to avoid getting streaks in my brush stroke so that it looks smooth and nice. And here it's perfectly fine to work back and forth with it a bit. Then I clean my brush again, and I can see that there's just a bit of blue missing, so I add a little extra color at the top and blend it a bit further down toward the middle. Now I change my water so I have completely clean water, because now we're going to start blending the colors. And I start with a wet clean brush at the top in the blue and gently work my way down toward the pink. And I blend the blue gently down into the pink, and this is really something you just have to sit and work with for a bit. It comes along slowly and steadily, and you will be able to see brush strokes as you work and while the paint is wet. The goal is to remove them as much as possible, and always make sure to work with a clean brush and start blending the colors together in the middle. And as you can see, I go all the way up and all the way down quite a lot. And that's simply to achieve these smooth transitions and get a bit of the pink into the blue and a bit of the blue into the pink. So just quietly work your way towards a graduation, which is really nice. And as long as the paint is wet, you'll be able to see the brush strokes more clearly than you will when it's dry. So the brush strokes that you can see right now will actually blend and smooth out a bit more as soon as the paint dries. Of course, you should always try to avoid visible brush strokes as much as possible whenever you can. Then you let your painting dry completely, making sure the surface is no longer wet. Let this gradient dry as well. And then we'll start carefully coloring the illustration, including the oranges and also the leaves. And that's what we're going to do now. I've started by mixing an orange. And here you might want to check out our video on how to mix all colors from the primary colors in the color palette. So I've mixed an orange and I'm now starting to paint my oranges. I'm basically just starting by painting all of them with this orange. Make sure you have enough of the color you've mixed, as it can be difficult to achieve exactly the same color again. And then I just calmly work on painting within the lines. And if you feel that the consistency of your paint is a bit too thick, well, then you can always add a little water by spraying the paint. You also see that I do this from time to time. Now you can actually see that I'm about to run out of my color. I haven't mixed quite enough here. So better too much than too little. You use quite a lot of paint, especially when you're making these very opaque layers. And it turns out so beautifully when it sits on top of this gradient, because then little by little a sort of sunset starts to appear in your painting. And now I've put the first layer on the orange, so now I'm mixing a slightly darker orange, and I'm simply doing that to apply it to the edge to create this illusion that the orange is round, so it gets this 3D effect. Now we're done with the oranges, and I've mixed a green using blue and yellow, which you can also go back and see in the color wheel video how to mix it. And then I start by painting the leaves. And it's okay if it takes time, and again you can see how super opaque it is. I just gave it an extra little spritz of water because I thought the consistency of my paint had gotten a bit too thick. What's so wonderful about gouache is that you can just add a little bit of water and then you get that lovely creamy consistency again, just like when you first started using it, which is really helpful. You'll also notice that gouache actually dries a bit darker than when you first paint it on, or when it's still wet it dries a little darker. So that's something important to keep in mind as you work with it, especially if you're aiming for a specific color. So you should also keep that in mind when mixing a color. You might want to add a few extra percent to the depth of the color. And nothing happens if, as you can see I'm doing here, you go a little outside the lens. No big deal. We're here to have fun, and it just makes it even more personal. So there's really no need to worry about that. I have a daughter at home who absolutely refuses to draw outside the lines, and I try to teach her that it's totally okay. And that's exactly what gives it soul, charm, and personality. It doesn't have to be perfect. There are so many ways to achieve a really beautiful result. You are the artist, and it will become your very own unique work. I've chosen to make the background blue and pink, but you can choose anything. Any colors. I just thought the blue and pink gave me references to a beautiful sunset, and I could really picture that in relation to having such a gorgeous orange tree standing there, like when you're on vacation and see these beautiful orange trees. Simply so beautiful, green leaves and also just those vibrant oranges. You'll also notice here that on some of my leaves, the background color doesn't get completely covered, but that's totally fine because we can always add more layers, let it dry, and then add more layers. And now I'm starting to mix more green, and this time I want my green to be a bit different. And that's simply to create some depth in the leaves. So I started by applying a slightly darker shade. Now I am beginning to work in a slightly lighter color. I'm imagining where the light falls to give it a three-dimensional look. Right now I'm applying it very loosely. I'll start blending it a bit later. So again, just take it easy, no pressure, just gently let the brush guide you. Imagine where you want the light to hit your leaves. So I start by mixing the green color, and I add a little, very little black, of course, because it is really effective in darkening the black color. You really have to be careful, so it's better to add too little than too much in this case. And here I can also just refer to our guide where you learn how to mix colors with black, so you kind of get a sense of how little is actually needed to achieve a very dark color. So now I'm using the darkest color that I've used, and as I mentioned earlier, that's to create a bit of this three-dimensional effect. And here, where before we had to imagine a bit where the light would fall, now I'm trying to imagine where the shadows could fall. And the first one I paint, you could say the leaf is kind of on top. There's a leaf a bit on top, and then I imagine that a shadow would fall right under the leaf. And again, nice and easy, we blend at the end, and that's what's truly fantastic about gouache, that even when it's actually dried, you can still blend it at the end. And now that I've added all that shadow to the leaves, I'm starting to gently and carefully blend it, so the transition between the dark green and the light green isn't so stark, but more faded. Okay, takes time. And maybe I mentioned this earlier, but what's great about gouache is that we can actually let it dry and then add a bit of liquid again with a brush, and we can actually start working with it again. It simply gets reactivated when you add some liquid to it. And I don't have the answer key before I start. I play with shadows and work until satisfied with transitions, so it's a process of experimenting. And in our starter kit, well, we actually have guidance for you on how to create this three-dimensional look and how you achieve these shadows. And I would just recommend that if you haven't already done it, to go in and simply go through all the techniques, because it's a huge advantage when you're about to start coloring your illustration. And now I have the leaves just the way I want them. Then I've mixed a brown color to create those little indentations that are often found on an orange. And here I simply use the other end of my small brush and make tiny little dots to illustrate the small indentations on the orange, that slightly rough, bumpy, textured surface. And now I'm mixing a lighter brown, and that's to get a bit of a lighter color on those bumps as well, just to give the picture a bit more life. If you haven't already made color wheels, I think you should do that before you start with the illustration. Otherwise, you can just take a look at the one we've already made and then mix from that to achieve exactly the color you want. It's just so amazing that when you have the three primary colors, blue, yellow, red, you can actually mix any color you want. And in our set there's also black and white, which allows you to blend the colors lighter or darker depending on what you want. And now the picture is finished, so I carefully remove the tape. And it's really important to be super careful here because it's crucial that you don't tear the paper. So as you can see, I'm going very gently. And it's just so satisfying to see this razor sharp edge that you get when you've made this marking with tape. It feels so satisfying to peel it off. Then you're left with a finished picture, and as you can see up in my corner, a little bit of paint has slipped underneath, and that just adds some personality, but it also shows how important it is to make sure the edge is really sharp, that you make sure to really press the tape down firmly. Then your artwork is finished, and you can frame it or hang it up, enjoy it or gift it if you like.